software engineering roles will be highly impacted, and that is going to happen. Now you can use English, Hindi, your regional language to write code that machine can understand.
How is agentic AI being utilized? What are the limitations of doing the job properly?
It is not a developer job to do the coding. Consistency, networking, and learning always. These are the three mantras. Be bold. This is the time that you can be the biggest contribution in the innovation cycle that is happening.
How is agentic AI being utilized and how are you using it? Welcome to another episode of the Apex Perspective podcast. Today I have with me Anil Bajpai, who is currently the vice president. Now he specifically focuses on today in Gen AI-based product development. However, he started off as a software engineer. Tell me a little bit more about your background and how led you to getting a specific niche of work.
Thank you, Aryan, and thanks for having me on the podcast. So I have done more than 25, 26 podcasts, and it is a different feeling to be the other side of the table. So a little bit about my background. I'm in the industry for last 18 years and worked with several product companies, service companies, and did my technical role as a delivery manager or delivery lead. And then also I help organization doing sales. So last couple of years, Gen AI and Agentic AI, this is very fast changing world. And that is what my focus and my team. And as part of this role, I've been working on Gen AI, Agentic AI, autonomous agent development. So those kind of things that I'm part of. And I'm super excited if you have seen a couple of my recent posts on LinkedIn. I've been doing vibe coding as well. Happy to be with you on this podcast.
Absolutely. And there's really interesting concept here because on my podcast, I've had the pleasure of interviewing a lot of people who focus on agentic AI in terms of making processes more automated, making them more efficient, being able to teach certain tasks to AI and being able to replicate those tasks. From a company standpoint, from a larger organization standpoint, how is agentic AI being utilized and how are you specifically focusing on it today?
Very interesting, Aryan. So if you break this Gen AI and Agentic AI, I call it different waves. So the first wave was Gen AI, where you got a tool like ChatGPT that everyone is using, very viral tool. Second, it is Agentic AI. You have seen that what Anthropic is doing to the market already. And the third one is going to be the AGI. Talking about Agentic AI, it is more value driven than just as a tool that enables you to do the context summarization or the context writing or content generation part. Agentic AI is something which you can think of replacing human with agents, and that is what is happening right now. So when you build any agent, it is more like you hire an intern. You keep training him or her. And this is what we used to call as reinforcement learning. With the over the period of time, when you keep giving the feedback, your intern gets smarter and then it starts working autonomously. So that is where this agent learns faster than any human. The feedback works really well. So when you think of agents, so I'll talk about like people usually get confused with RPA world and then agent. Couple of properties that agent would have is it has memory. It remembers the context.
Right.
Then it has access to tools. In the RPA world, you just have access to the tools, not about the memory or the reasoning or the intelligence part. So there was one product that we built around. So let's say that your RPA is doing automation for invoice processing. That underlying tool, maybe if it is SAP, if it is Salesforce or anything else, when the tool itself changes because they have their own production cycle, the RPA bot starts failing. And that is where the escalation starts happening in the business. But with this agentic AI, it has a self-healing feature. So it identifies if there are minor changes in the UI, it should be able to self-heal and should be able to adopt accordingly. That is the best part of agent. Wow. Second thing, let's say that if you do the invoice processing, there are common questions that you ask to, let's say, the upstream team. So it remembers that mostly when this vendor is sending the invoices, these are the usual follow-ups. So it remembers those conversations and then accordingly, before even it goes to the downstream system, it asks like 2 or 3 questions upfront. So that makes things efficient. And recently there was a demo that I've seen after OpenClaw, and this is something our team has built also. So just think about it, a real human team. There is a sales guy, and then there is a project manager, there is a technical architect, and then there are developers. So the way we do the communication, the sales guy tell everything to the delivery manager. This delivery manager runs DSM, talks to the technical lead, architect, and developers, and orchestrate the work. At the end, between delivery manager and the salesperson, they both interact and get the work delivered to the client. This all is possible without human involved. So you can actually spin up these agents, assign them individual skill set, that this is your role. This is how you need to do the DSM. This is how you need to run, and they can work 24 hours. So that is how it is happening right now. There are certain limitation just because it is they are learning. They are in the phase of learning. So sometimes you'll see like they talk more, Aryan. They are very talkative at this time. So this is something we are fine tuning, but it is very interesting world.
As far as limitations specifically, we discussed tasks that it can do. I've also had the pleasure of understanding what kind of things are these tasks specifically. But from your point of view, as far as where it stands right now with Agentic AI, what are the limitations of doing the job properly?
I would say limitation, more than limitation, what enterprises are concerned that they don't do something which is not expected to do. You must have seen that there was a news that these agents have built their own programming language. They build something, their own communication language, because something you have just completely made autonomous. So what enterprises are, they want to adapt for its capability, but at the same time, they want it in a governed way. So that is where you must have listened to the tools like human in the loop, AI governance, security. So these are the concerns that enterprises are solving, where like any startup would do it because they don't hold the data, they just hold the idea. So that is one thing. And second thing that I want to talk about in terms of limitations is still the biggest thing is human. Let's say that if I worked 7 years, 8 years in SAP, I understand the context. If I
Right.
worked several years in the industry and I know about a domain. So I would say still like there is a creativity that human has that is missing. So sometimes you just don't, because all these agents are taking their reasoning and intelligence because of the LLM data that they have. But humans are creative. They find a way, they know the navigation. So that's where there are certain boundary edge cases. That's where there are still limitations,
Okay.
but it is a evolving space. I would say like this will not be a gap sometime in the future.
The human to human interaction as well could be considered something that could be a limitation as long as creative tasks specifically. As far as these human to human interactions, there are sales processes that are done via online, via text-based process. Could that possibly be done via an agentic AI, or is that something that right now, from what I understand about the sales process, which actually required in human to human interaction?
Are you saying the sales process?
As in the sales process, there are certain companies that use text-based processes. Some of them use actual live-based call processes. As of now, do you think text-based processes can be done via an agentic AI?
So the other way, if I rephrase your question, right, what are the key roles that cannot be done by agent? So definitely sales is one creative role. And that's where like it goes to my past conversation where I'm talking about where creativity involved, where art is involved. So interacting, reading face, judging the conversation. I believe those kind of thing will still, some of these roles will still be played by human, and especially sales role. However, if you think like can agent do the sales, do the outreach call, do the cold email, yes, it is possible.
Yes.
But judging and changing the tone of conversation, I believe it is not that mature. And no one wants to, if and even if you see most of these call centers, they are evolving in a space so that they mimic more like human. So,
Mhm.
and interestingly, you will see they have put some fillers like human use, like yes, okay, obviously. The reason for that is so that it looks more
Human. Yeah.
than agent, because no one wants to talk to a machine. And wherever human touch is required, be it a sales, be it a leadership, be it, I would say, the non-technical things, obviously, a human will definitely be required. The way how I see following some of the conversations by Microsoft and Elon Musk, Nvidia, what all they are trying to do is making your native language closer to the programming. So if you see that machine doesn't understand even Java or Python, right? They have their own native language. So what these Java, Python, it is kind of a programming language that is easy to understand so that it gets converted to the machine code that machine can interact with. Now that gap is getting closer. Now you can use English, Hindi, your regional language to write code that machine can understand. That is the thing that is happening.
In the next 5 years, from your perspective, where do you see agentic AI being able to do in terms of the product development space specifically?
And that's all my opinion. I may be wrong, right?
Sure.
What I'm hearing, what I'm researching, what I've been having some access to some of the companies, I definitely see that AGI gonna be real. So product development will be done by just like software engineering roles will be highly impacted, and that is gonna happen.
Mhm.
Now, how the human resources would be used, their domain knowledge, their expertise. So something that could be done in 3 months, 4 months, probably that can be done in a day. That is going to happen. But
Wow.
at the same time, this is not something to be like, you should not have fear about it. But this is a wave that you need to ride. This
Mhm.
is something you have to invest your 1 hour, 2 hour on a daily basis to learn vibe coding, learn tools that are happening. Because if you starting with GenAI now, you're already 1 year late. So
Yeah.
that is how I think sooner is better. And that's what I tell to my team and my connections. That is through your medium, I would repeat the same.
Excellent. And I think that the perspective you provided today was really incredibly important. Any task that requires any degree of creativity, especially from the human perspective, it's not something that yet can be replaced by agentic AI. However, it can be very efficient when it comes to the communication process, when it comes to others' repetitive tasks, when it comes to even teaching it specific skill sets and being able to execute upon them. That does not require creative skill sets. I think that's a really important perspective you provided today. Let's go ahead and move this conversation to a little bit more about you, Anil. And the first question I have for you is, what is something about your life that you wish more people knew about?
One thing that I want to emphasize on this conversation, that when you are persistent, when you don't leave things and you don't get feel failures, you are consistent, you can see success. So I come from a very humble background. I started my journey in Kanpur, and my first company was Dainik Jagran. That's a newspaper industry, Aryan. I still remember, like, when I used to appear for some interviews in the IT company, they said, your company is just a newspaper company. Why we should even give you a chance for interview? So from there to the journey that I traveled, I believe mentorship is very much important. And then
Mhm.
second thing, you should believe in yourself, and that is the journey. And second thing, you should never stop learning. I was
Mhm.
watching one video yesterday that is from Microsoft senior leadership. They are saying it is not a developer's job to do the coding now. Even company founders, CEO, SVPs, they all are doing vibe coding. The reason is they want to get this thing hands dirty. So one thing that comes out very clearly, learning is the key. Learning
Good.
should be throughout your career. And in this current era, I would say networking gonna be really, really important. So,
Agreed.
as you mentioned, Aryan, like when you started doing this podcast, you got hundreds of internship offer, right? Similarly, I got exposed to some of the problems that I could not really experience in my working scope,
Mhm.
just because talked to several leaders and I learned from their failures, their success. So
Mhm.
networking is definitely going to help. And that's what consistency, networking, and learning always, these are the three mantras.
Agreed. And if there's an opposition to networking itself, I would like people to understand a certain perspective that if you are introduced to someone that has a very specific expert domain of knowledge in one area, you could be exposed to a new opportunity you never knew existed in the first place. That could be a completely different life for you. So there should be no opposition to networking. It should be an asset it should be a skill you need to learn, essentially,
Yep.
especially in the coming years. I absolutely agree with that point. So you started a podcast. Tell me more about your podcast and why you started it.
Oh, that's very interesting. So what was happening, like I used to see a lot of advertisement that 70%, 80% of GenAI projects gets failed. There is not enough ROI. There are reports from Gartners everywhere, which is creating a lot of confusion, I would say.
Mhm.
Because then there were few who were like bold movers who actually started the journey, but somewhere they have this doubt in the mind whether it will work or not. Second, those who are waiting for this wave to settle down and understand whether it's a real thing or not. So I started interacting. I started creating a lot of Medium articles and LinkedIn posts. Then people suggested, they started engaging with these posts and these Medium articles. Then I thought, why don't I learn something direct? Because there was a translation loss. For
Mhm.
example, when you and I are interacting, right? And when you and I discussed over phone call, there are few things that we are not able to discuss in this. That's a translation loss. And
Right.
if we write this in the article and then probably share it, it depends on the audience it reaches, but video connects very effectively. So I started building videos, and that helped me, that helped my guest. Even some of the guests after this got invitation on TED Talks. They are big names. So helping me building my knowledge network and helping my guest as well.
And I think it's really interesting. I've had the pleasure in interviewing quite a few guests, and even after these conversations, when they're able to articulate their thoughts on a podcast, sometimes they get revelations that they didn't have before. So it's not just about the exposure itself, but it's also about their ability to understand what they're doing and explain the concept to someone else that potentially isn't as experienced. And then there's sometimes when you teach certain concepts, teaching is different from learning. So you can potentially see different perspectives to it. So I think that's also a massive benefit as well. What kind of person were you if you were to revisit yourself in your 20s?
So I would say one thing after, and I would just say, like, if I have to see my life retrospectively, I started with a fear that I need to learn good, I need to be in a job, and that's where I am. But if you ask me advice my 20 years now, I would say be bold. This is the time that you can be the biggest contribution in the innovation cycle that is happening. So don't worry about your job, worry about your skills, worry about the build startups, go crazy on your ideas. This is the best time. This is the best enablement. And I would tell Aryan in 2026, if you have an idea, you can build in 2 days. Whereas in the past, because I worked prior to cloud also. So that time, the biggest challenge was if I build my idea in 6 months, where I'll build the data center, how will I distribute my app? Then there was another, I would say, innovation happened of cloud. Now, if you have just $1,000, you can buy a data center, and as your idea scales, you can start investing your money. So that was the first enabler, I would say. Then right now, with the help of GenAI and Agentic AI, most of these applications provide enough free tokens where you can build your application and build your platform and go live. So I would say rather than just focusing on job, you should focus on idea, be a solopreneur. That is the time that if I have to start at my 20s right now, I would say myself.
Excellent. And one last question for you is you mentioned being bold and doing startups. How does one get over fear to do that?
So that something is like what our parents used to tell. You can avoid fear by practicing it. You cannot avoid fear by running away from it. So if you do small ideas, if you reach out to your network that this is what you want to do, probably there are thousands of people at least listen to your ideas if you do it effectively. And second, getting funding these days are very common.
Yeah.
Right. So if you have an idea, fail fast, try yourself, build at least a prototype, reach out to your network, try to market it, and then you'll get to know whether this idea is good or not. So if you listen to the industry leaders, what they say, it is always good to fail fast because one, either you should be able to build something which you will be proud of, or you will have a good learning that you can take to your next idea. Elon Musk is a great example.
Excellent. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and share a very concise perspective regarding fitness and health, and then we'll go ahead and do the podcast with Anil's plans for this year or the coming year. To make this as concise as possible and to deliver my perspective on fitness and health in the most concise way possible, I'll start with this statement. I don't really believe the gym is really an efficient way if the goal is for you to lose fat specifically.
One most important thing while I was talking about technology, I was talking about one thing I would say health is gonna be the most important.
Okay.
And you and I discussed this offline, but somehow I did not recall because if you turn 40, Aryan, the most important thing for you is your health. Until 40, like you start challenging yourself, less sleep, junk food, no gym, no exercise. But there is a saying there are thousands problem until your health become one.
I'll actually support that argument because I actually used to be pre-diabetic, and that was making the future of my life was going to be putting an insulin into my body and tracking that for the large part of my life. And that is taking a lot of time away from me. But in general, that also shortened my lifespan by 10 years. So you're absolutely right on that regard. Now, as far as my perspective, I will say something that's quite controversial. I think that most people won't agree with this, but I have a different point of view. And this is from what I've used for myself. I don't really think the gym is as useful and as efficient if the pure goal is for you to lose weight or lose fat. The reason I say this is because when you're talking about using a gym-based approach, you have to commute to the gym, come back from the gym. You have to spend an hour there. and the expectation you're going to do this 4 to 5 times a week with a very busy schedule like an entrepreneur or an executive, that's going to be far more difficult to adhere to. And on the long run, there's a potential chance you can't actually adhere to this and you might not ever get to the goal itself. So rather than focus on what's traditionally sold to you, figure out the actual mechanism behind what actual weight loss is and what actually drives that, as opposed to just focus on what's conventionally told to you. If you look at that, if you research the PubMed or the National Institute of Health, there's really one mechanism. It's negative energy balance. And that happens when you have the right amount of movement and the right calorie intake. Out of these two, what takes the time conventionally or traditionally is the movement. So instead of doing this in one fixed location like a gym, which you can only do if you have the time, focus on using a location independent movement, something you can do anytime, anywhere. What I would specifically recommend is leveraging something like step count, because you can do that while we're listening to this podcast. You can do that literally right after a call. You can do that during a call if you have the capacity to. You can do that while you're traveling, but you cannot go to a gym all the time. You cannot always commute to the gym all the time. And that is what costs you progress and a long enough time scale. If you're an executive and entrepreneur with a demanding schedule, it's not going to be able to stick as well as something that's more location independent. The second part is, if the argument is I want to put on muscle, then I have a similar argument, not a similar argument, but rather being more efficient with it. You don't have to go to the gym 4 times a week for that. The idea is you have to look at the mechanism behind what drives your success there, and then do it in the most simple way possible. The idea is if you get stronger on a week-to-week basis, that's more than enough than spending 4 times a week in the gym. You have to look at what actually drives change and consolidate the requirements and achieve that in the most simple way possible. Otherwise, your time is very valuable and it's not going to be used as efficiently. So there's regimented ways to do it and there's efficient ways to do it. So efficient ways requires you to consolidate the requirements and achieve it in the most simple way possible. Now, traditionally, I would show the podcast a picture my weight loss, but you can go and search up my name. I'm sure you're gonna be able to see that. But this is exactly what I used to lose over 70 pounds. And I did not go to the gym. I did not do the crazy 4 time a week routine. The idea is if you look at the requirements, you adhere to them in the most simple way possible, then you can achieve that. So that's a perspective I want to share today. There are regimented ways to do something, and there's also efficient ways. I would focus on the efficient ways. So what we'll do now is go and conclude the fitness conversation and go ahead and move on to Anil's plans for this year or the coming year.
Sure. So Aryan, I would like to continue this discussion, at least
Sure.
the fitness one, offline also, just to see like what worked for you and probably learn something.
Sure. Perfect. Awesome. So tell me more about what you plan to do professionally or personally for next year.
So one thing that I've started, Aryan, recently, I would say I'm tracking my daily step and I'm recording it also. Means when I say
Okay.
record, I plan that I'm going to walk 5 miles tomorrow. That is top in my to-do.
Okay.
I build my to-do on a daily basis. I put it that this is something I'm going to achieve tomorrow. And the moment I did, and this is a great way, like if you ask me, Anil, what helps you to keep a track of hundreds of items, I say plan your tomorrow today itself. That's
Absolutely.
what I do. I just put this as a top priority that I'm not going to miss it. And then when it happens, the day starts, I always like have anxiety when I'm going to complete it. The moment I complete it, I have that sense of achievement, and that's where I tick this on my note that I've done. I'm going to make it much more, I would say, the rigor gonna be better over the period of time. I used to be a marathoner before my current job, and I used to run like a half marathon, and sometimes I attempted for full. So I'm going to be on that track. I'll see with my current schedule how much it is feasible. But that's something target for this year, Aryan.
Interesting. Awesome. Well, that's very interesting. I think you shared some very important perspectives today. And one last thing I'll also say is how to be more driven, I would say, potentially. So I did a TED Talk about 2 years ago on the topic of finding your why. And a lot of people, you have to understand that if you're trying to achieve something difficult, if you don't have a reason compelling enough to do it, you're not going to feel inclined to do it. It has to be a reason that's actually worth fighting for you. For many people, for some, it could be vanity. For others, it could be that you actually want to become a better person for you, your family, or it could be that you want to prove something to yourself, but it has to be something worth fighting for. And if you align your actions, each step required of that goal in pursuit of that bigger reason for you, you're going to may have a much easier time wanting to do this. In fact, you're going to want to do the difficult things because you know it's going to satisfy the bigger reason as to why you're doing this. And that's the concept behind the why part. But I love your goals. I think that you shared some very important perspectives today regarding agentic AI, what its limitations are, where we're going to go see what's going to happen with AGI in the next couple of years. I really appreciate you for coming on the podcast, and it was a pleasure to hear your perspectives. This was Aryan Mohindra and Anil Bajpai. Thank you for listening.